Chapter 14. The deepest surrender is the one that is not demanded. Ealasaid called a small child's voice. Shush, Toran, quiet, Ealasaid whispered, glancing at the children around her. Two identical girls with blonde braids put a finger to their lips. Toran scrunched his nose but stayed silent. Ealasaid whistled softly, as she watched a branch in front of her. A bird with white feathers stared back at her, and she, along with the children standing beside her, gave it their full attention. She was used to seeing these birds with brown feathers, but never one like this. It surprised her, she hadn't seen them in England. Then again, she had barely explored her homeland. The bird tilted its head, and Ealasaid extended her palm filled with breadcrumbs, smiling to encourage it closer. The bird flew to a lower branch, nearer to them. Pretty bird, murmured Isla, prompting her sister Ailsa to elbow her into silence. But the bird seemed to like Isla. It stared at her before tilting its head again.
Hold out your arm, Ealasaid said to Isla, who obeyed and placed the crumbs in her small hand.
You must stay very still, Ealasaid instructed, and the girl nodded, smiling at the bird. The bird, as if signaled, flew to them and landed delicately on Astrid's open hand. Toran opened his mouth to speak, but Ealasaid placed a finger to her lips again, urging silence. It tickles, said Astrid, as the bird ate. The bird looked up at her briefly, before pecking again. They all fell silent, watching with curiosity. When the bird finished eating, it flew, not back to the tree, but to a small nearby stone. Excited, Astrid stepped closer and crouched down to its level. Do you want to be my friend? She asked sweetly. In response, the bird perched on her head, making her laugh, then flew off, disappearing among the trees. Toran snorted, skeptical. Animals don't talk.
Yes, they do, Isla corrected him.
Right, Ealasaid. Ealasaid watched the small argument with a smile and nodded. You just have to know how to listen. An animal will want to be your friend too, Toran. You only need to wait for it to choose you, she said, ruffling his hair.
I don't want a bird.
I want a wolf, Toran declared. A wolf will bite you, Ailsa warned. Toran shook his head.
Wolves can be friends too.
They can, Ealasaid agreed, convinced. She made no distinctions among animals, no matter how fierce they might seem. If you're worthy of its friendship, it will accept you. I will be, Toran said firmly. Ealasaid smiled gently, sure that this boy would one day find a friend among the clan's animals, be it a wolf, a bird, or even a horse. What she knew for certain was that he'd find a loyal companion, one that would never abandon him. During her 3 weeks at Rutherford Fortress, Ealasaid had felt welcomed, not only by the animals as she had expected, but by the clan members too. The children adored her, running around her as they played with the animals she cared for. Most surprising to Ealasaid was that their mothers, delighted, allowed it. At her father's castle, Ealasaid had barely been allowed to interact with other children. The social divide was clear, she was the Baron's daughter. Though they respected her, behind her back they questioned her sanity. That didn't happen in the Rutherford clan. At first some had found it odd to see her talking to a squirrel or tending a wounded bird, but now everyone smiled at her, some even offered help. Here she was accepted as she was. Astrid, Ailsa, it's time for dinner, called a woman's voice, interrupting her thoughts. An older woman than Ealasaid appeared, her black hair pinned in a bun. Though her face wore a smile, her eyes held the sadness of recent loss. She had been widowed just 3 weeks ago. Ealasaid had been helping her with the girls, who still didn't understand that they would never see their father again. That moved Ealasaid deeply. She was grateful her own father had been protected during the wars. Mama, Mama! Astrid shouted, running to her. I made a friend. It's a bird, and his feathers are white. The woman smiled tenderly, kissing her daughter's cheek. Why don't you invite him to dinner at our cottage one day? Astrid shook her head. He likes being outside. Toran with a proud air chimed in. Like me. The woman smiled again, though a trace of melancholy passed over her face. Your mother's looking for you, Toran. It's time to eat.
But Torun, still holding Ealasaid's hand, didn't want to leave.
I want to stay with Ealasaid. Me too, added Astrid, grabbing Ealasaid's other hand. Ailsa, the quietest of them, came closer without a word, making it clear she wanted to stay as well. The girl's mother sighed softly. It's late. The animals are getting ready for sleep, Ealasaid said, glancing toward the trees. They wake with the sun. You need to eat and rest so you can play with them tomorrow. Though the children protested, Torun, full of energy, responded. I never get tired.
Ealasaid laughed softly. I don't have as much energy as you do.
And if I get tired, she said, exchanging a knowing look with the mother, I'd better get some rest. Tomorrow I have to collect eggs from the hens. Do you want to come with me? The three children nodded eagerly, distracted by the promise. Satisfied, Ealasaid smiled and gave her consent. Very well, then you must listen to your mothers. Ailsa walked up to Ealasaid and kissed her cheek. Astrid did the same, but Torun, who thought such gestures were for little kids, just looked at her. Ealasaid, smiling warmly, hugged him. Then the children ran off toward the row of cottages. Thank you for your patience with my daughters, said Ira the mother, with a sad smile. Thanks to you they're less sad. I'm trying to be strong, but… Ealasaid looked at her, understanding the pain. She took her hands in a gesture of comfort. Ira, your words have filled my heart with joy. It's a pleasure to be with your daughters. They're a gift from heaven. Ira nodded, holding back tears. You're a strong woman, and you'll find the strength to move forward, Ealasaid told her, her gaze full of compassion. Ira said goodbye with the girls, and Ealasaid silently watched the woman leave, feeling a deep connection with her. Chapter 15. Between duty and desire, the soul tests itself. Ealasaid had never felt so nervous, not even in moments that demanded all her composure. And beyond that there was something else, a subtle yet deep anger that Evander seemed able to stir in her with disconcerting ease. They didn't need to speak much for that emotion to surface. She descended the stairs to the great hall, and as she stepped off the final stone stair, a sigh escaped her lips. The blue dress she wore, made from delicate fabric, wasn't something she would have chosen herself. In fact, it hadn't been her choice at all, it was Marceli's. Ealasaid hadn't objected. She had pretended she didn't want to upset her friend. But deep down she felt the dress made her look beautiful. And although she didn't quite understand it, part of her wanted Evander to be surprised. Her hair was gathered in a braided bun, a hairstyle her mother had always deemed elegant and fitting for a lady who wished to make an impression. Upon entering the great hall, Ealasaid first noticed the echo of voices, the deep laughter, the scent of warm bread and ale. The warriors filled the long wooden tables, shoulder to shoulder, like tangled branches in a noisy forest. But her gaze was drawn almost unwillingly to a smaller table set apart from the din, where Evander awaited her. He rose when he saw her, pulling out a chair. A courteous gesture, yes, but there was a smile on his lips that wasn't entirely clear. She couldn't tell whether what she felt was distrust or something deeper, murkier, like a current she couldn't see but could certainly sense. Evander was a well-known laird, a man who commanded respect, and yet in his presence the memory of Owen returned with the weight of something lost and distant, like a scent that can no longer be caught. That hairstyle suits you, milady, Evander said as he sat down. Thank you, laird, Ealasaid murmured, recalling her mother's voice that morning, the gentle tug on her braids, words that had not been advice but a warning dressed in affection. Though I prefer you with your hair down. It makes you look wilder, he added in a whisper so close that his breath brushed her ear. Heat rose to her cheeks, and though she knew Evander was pleased to have provoked her, her treacherous mind conjured the memory of a past kiss. A brief one, barely more than a breath, yet still tucked away like a poorly kept secret. She inhaled deeply as if the air might clear her thoughts. Raising her chin, she leaned in slightly toward him, her voice steady though quiet. We are not married. It is not proper for us to dine alone. We are not alone, he replied, motioning to the men still laughing and drinking. And yet, Ealasaid, the entire hall seemed to fade. Only that table remained, that closeness, that different silence that sometimes falls between two people who don't entirely understand one another.
We should sit with them, she insisted, without much hope.
She knew it was more gesture than true desire. Evander shook his head. This is the family table. My brothers are away. That leaves only us, milady. She nodded, but something within her tightened like a rope pulled too taut. She took a sip of water, eyes lowered. The serving girls brought in trays, and a plate of cheese and bread was placed between them. When do your brothers return? She asked, seeking another path, anything to steer away from the discomfort she didn't want to name. In truth, it was Marsili who was anxious about Orlais. And through that borrowed unease, Ealasaid had begun to worry as well. It was a quiet concern, unnamed, like a shadow at the threshold. Evander broke off a piece of cheese with his hands, effortlessly, as if manners were of no concern. Ealasaid watched him, wondering why the way he disregarded the etiquette drilled into her could seem so brutally honest. Which of my brothers are you waiting for? He asked.
None, laird.
I only care for their well-being, she replied. It wasn't a lie, though it wasn't the whole truth. As she chewed slowly, she realized he wasn't listening closely. His eyes were on her lips. That look made her feel watched in a way she didn't fully understand, as if she were less a person and more a mystery. She felt her tongue dry and moistened her lips. It was an instinctive gesture, but Evander's slight start, the way he swallowed, did not go unnoticed. Have I done something wrong, laird? She asked, more from discomfort than true interest.
Not at all, girl, he said, but his voice had changed.
It had become slower, heavier. There was something in his gaze that unsettled her, something she couldn't decipher. Like a door left ajar she didn't dare cross. Have you had no news from your brothers? She pressed. This time the question seemed to fall like a stone into water. Evander's face tightened. Ealasaid noticed the shift, and for a moment regretted speaking. Have my words offended you? Nothing disturbs me, milady, he replied, smiling with an arrogance she felt like a weight. Is it Rouagri you miss? The question threw her off. Not because of the name, but the tone. There was something insinuating in it that made her recoil, even though her body didn't move.
I don't understand you.
Perhaps you think I'm bothering you? Evander let out a brief laugh. Is that what you feel, a desire for him? The heat returned to her cheeks, this time with a fury she didn't know the source of. Not because of the insinuation, but something deeper, the feeling of not being heard, of being twisted.
You're disrespecting me, she whispered, her voice restrained.
The words came out before she could stop them. Not because they were new, but because they had always been there, on the verge of breaking. Evander raised an eyebrow.
How should I treat you?
As a lady, or as my betrothed? It's the same, she replied, though she knew it wasn't. He reached out and rested his hand on her thigh over the fabric. A brief touch, but as invasive as a blow. Ealasaid froze. She knew she should push him away, say something, but inside her thick confusion held her still. You're wilder than you care to admit, he murmured as if that were a shared secret. She looked at him, furious but more with herself than with him. Why hadn't she stopped him? Why did it feel like her silence had given something away? Perhaps you're right, laird, she said, her voice tense. Of course I am, he smiled. You'll have to wait until we're married to unleash your nature. Ealasaid wanted to dump the jug over his head. But composure had been taught to her, like a second skin. She stayed calm. As you wish, my lord, she said coldly. And then an idea flashed through her like lightning. Though you've misunderstood my words, perhaps I do desire your brother. She didn't know where it came from. Only that she needed to wound him, even a little, even if it would hurt her more later. Evander looked at her, his eyes darkened. Ealasaid saw her own fury mirrored in his. They were no longer speaking. They were fighting. She wanted to apologize, but a tray appeared in front of her. The smell of roasted meat hit her before the sight. A pig, with the head intact. Eyes open. Still.
but fixed on her.
Lyra, she cried, the name bursting out like a charm. She stood, but another pig further away made her tremble. The air in the hall turned thick. Unbreathable. She ran outside, and the cold night air returned the world to her. But her heart kept galloping in her chest like a wild horse. She didn't know if it was from fear, fury, or something older and harder to name. Chapter 16. Magic does not create, it reveals. Ealasaid let the night breeze caress her face as she walked beside Evander, along a winding path that cut through the rolling fields she already knew well. And yet, it was the first time she saw them under the silver light of the full moon, and that familiarity took on a different hue, as if something dormant had awakened in the folds of the night. "Your lands are even more beautiful wrapped in the darkness of night," she said almost without thinking. The silence they had shared until then hadn't weighed on her. On the contrary, there was an unexpected stillness in it, as if they were breathing in the same rhythm.
"There is no beauty in the dark, milady," he replied curt.
Ealasaid tilted her head slightly, eyes still on the undulating horizon.
"That's not true, my lord.
Darkness hides another kind of beauty. Like a secret only some can see." Her words came out more as a thought aloud than a contradiction. Evander shook his head. "If you wander into it alone, unguarded, all you'll find is death. That's where the cruelest predators lie in wait." Ealasaid stopped, more intrigued by his tone than his words. The moon cast a shadow over Evander's face, sharpening his features. For a moment, she thought there was something broken in him. Something old, speaking from a place she couldn't reach. "If a predator needs to hide to attack," she began but didn't finish. It wasn't a statement. More an incomplete thought, a spark of an idea she didn't yet know how to name. She lowered her gaze, adding nothing more. "Even in broad daylight, there are predators who live in the dark," he added, more to himself than to her. "Those are the ones you should truly fear." The warning sank in, even if she didn't fully grasp its meaning. Ealasaid narrowed her eyes, as if the meaning lay in the edges of what was left unsaid. Then the wind shifted, carrying a familiar scent. Smoke. Then laughter, and the crackle of branches. Evander tensed and grabbed her by the waist with such speed it stole her breath. He pulled her behind him in a motion that allowed no protest, drawing a dagger from his boot. Ealasaid resisted the urge to speak. The blade glinted faintly. She told herself it couldn't be an enemy. Not with that smell of alcohol or those carefree laughs.
But she didn't speak up.
He seemed like a different man, his focus sharp, almost savage, wrapping around her like a shield. She tried to step back, but he felt it and held her with his arm. His closeness was unsettling. Not because of danger, which she now doubted, but because of how it made her feel, trapped and yet protected. "You're too stubborn for your own good," he muttered through clenched teeth. Ealasaid sighed, lowering her head slightly, not in submission but to avoid looking at him. She didn't know if what she felt was frustration or something more complicated. "We're within your fortress. If they were enemies they wouldn't be so loud," she said, her voice calm.
"Nothing is obvious," he answered.
"Danger can hide behind a smile." Their eyes met. In his there was something cold, unfathomable. A depth where a darkness shone that had nothing to do with the night. And then, like a sharp blow, Ealasaid understood, Evander wasn't afraid of predators. He was one. A question trembled inside her: what if I don't want him to protect me? What if I want to protect him? She had no time to answer. Figures emerged from the trees, stumbling. Evander tensed. The dagger rose, and for a moment the world felt fragile. One of the boys cried out and fell, dragging another down with him. Then the voices became clear. "Nya. To kill." Evander recognized them with a mix of irritation and relief. "What are you doing in the woods?" "I knew you couldn't walk on one leg," joked one between breathless laughs. But the joy faded as soon as they met the laird's eyes. Clumsy hands hid the flask like children caught misbehaving. "Back to your cabins," Evander ordered, voice low and stern. "And no one shows up drunk on the field tomorrow." I want you out before dawn. The boys didn't argue. They simply nodded and walked off with slow, clumsy steps. Evander turned on his heel, his figure straightening as if none of the tension weighed on him at all.
Let's go back, he said with a slight tilt of his head.
Ealasaid followed him in silence. But when they crossed the threshold of the fortress, and Evander began veering toward the training yard, she couldn't help pausing for a moment. The night had changed. Not because of danger, but because of what it had revealed about them both. Thank you for improving the night, my lord, she said at last, unsure if it was true but feeling she had to say it. Evander didn't reply. And she didn't wait for him to. There was enough in the silence. As he turned, Ealasaid had already disappeared behind the walls. Once again she had caught him off guard. A flicker of the fury consuming him dimmed, though not entirely. He still felt ridiculous. He who had so often trusted his instincts to survive battle, had nearly slit the throats of 3 drunken boys. Even Ealasaid, with no training at all, had seen it before he did. He never acted on impulse. He calculated, assessed. But that night, protecting her had been his only thought. And yet, she had been in danger. Evander realized it with a devastating certainty, as he recalled the desire that had consumed him. He had nearly torn Ealasaid's dress, and taken her right there under the starlit sky. He had never felt such urgency for any woman. He who never let passion rule him, who sought company only for physical release without attachment or concern. Since Ealasaid's arrival, he hadn't touched another. Maybe that was the problem, he told himself with a trace of cynicism. So he headed toward the cottage of one of the widows, who used to ease his body without burdening his soul. But the moment he crossed the threshold, he knew with a sharp, dry certainty that he couldn't go through with it. He left in silence and returned to his chambers. He let himself fall onto the bed, eyes closed, trying to break the spell he felt tightening around him. He clung to his conviction like a rope in a storm. She held no power over him. She was nothing more than an insolent girl. For a moment, he thought he was free. But when sleep took him, he was met in the dark by pale blue eyes and a smile that followed him even there, where neither pride nor reason could reach him. Chapter 17. There is no duty more sacred than caring for what the soul recognizes as its own. Are you dreaming of me? The male voice, familiar as the wind whispering through the trees, made Ealasaid open her eyes slowly. The sky, clear and blue, greeted her with a gentle sun that warmed her face and kissed her pale cheeks with gold. She felt at peace, though a quiet unease stirred in her stomach, as if her soul sensed an invisible danger. Even so, she refused to let fear take hold. Not while he was beside her. I hope you are, the voice said tenderly, because you're the brightest star in mine. Owen sat beside her in the grass. Ealasaid sat up, still without answering. Her mind was trying to piece together how she'd gotten there. She didn't need to look around to know they were on the hill behind her father's castle, where she used to tend the sheep on Sundays after Mass, so the shepherd could spend the afternoon with his family. You're always in mine too, she finally said, a dreamy smile blooming as she gazed at the face she loved so deeply. Owen had always seemed beautiful to her. His brown hair, soft hazel eyes and serene features looked carved by the gods. And she wasn't the only one enchanted by him. Young women sighed for him wherever he went. But that afternoon, something inside her longed for a different kind of beauty. Something more intense. More earthly. Darker. She shook her head, trying to chase away the absurd thought. Where were these feelings coming from? I've missed you, Ealasaid, he said, bringing her back to the moment. Every night, before sleep, I asked God to let tomorrow be the day I could finally come for you. Ealasaid looked at him, confused. We saw each other at Mass this morning. And yesterday. We see each other almost every day. You haven't left, Owen. He frowned, and instead of answering, pointed at her neck. Ealasaid touched the pendant she wore, a gift from him, one that had belonged to her mother. But when she lifted her gaze, he was gone. So was the sun. Night had taken the sky deep and absolute. Ealasaid stood, disoriented but not afraid. That darkness didn't feel foreign. It wrapped around her with familiarity, like something she'd always belonged to. The unease vanished, replaced by a strange soothing calm. Then she heard footsteps approaching. Her eyes, oddly adjusted to the dark, made out the path to the castle, even though the moon was hidden behind clouds. She started running, but no matter how far she went, the path never ended. Something was wrong. The castle wasn't that far. She should have reached it by now. But ahead, there was only forest and earth. She felt the urge to stop and clear her mind, but she wasn't tired. Her legs kept moving, driven by a need to flee. From something. From someone. Though deep down she knew she couldn't run. Because the darkness wasn't chasing her, it was calling to her. Promising her another life, one of mystery, beauty, and love. Love? She had already found love, under the daylight. In Owen's pale eyes. Confused, she stopped abruptly and raised a hand to her neck. The pendant was gone. She lowered her hand just as the footsteps grew louder. She tried to run again, but her feet wouldn't move. She looked down, nothing held her. It was as if her body refused to obey her mind. Then she saw him. A shadow emerged before her. She couldn't make out his face, but she saw the eyes. Eyes as black as the night that surrounded them. "You can't escape me," Ealasaid. "I will always find you." A smile curved Ealasaid's lips. "And who said I want to run? Maybe I've stopped already. Maybe I've decided to stay." The unsettling dream woke her in the middle of the night. Unable to fall back asleep, she spent hours clutching the pendant Owen had given her, begging for strength not to stray from the path God had laid out for her. Because she truly believed Owen was her destiny. At dawn, she made her way to the small chapel within the fortress. She knelt before the altar and prayed. She pleaded for clarity. For the purity of her heart. But when she closed her eyes, it wasn't Owen's kind face that emerged from the shadows, it was Evander's dark gaze. Once again, she was surrendering to his memory. She left the chapel with a single thought in mind: she needed to get away. Not run but breathe, somewhere beyond the walls. She told Marsili she was feeling unwell, and would retire to her chamber, but in truth, she used the bustle of the market to slip away. She mounted her mare and crossed the drawbridge with a light heart. She felt no guilt. Only freedom. She had no intention of dishonoring her family, or disappearing. She only needed the comfort of the countryside, the company of Owen, and whatever animals might cross her path. As soon as they reached a clearing, she urged her mare into a gallop. Ealasaid closed her eyes and felt the wind on her face, her dress fluttering like wings. Owen, delighted, picked up speed. In the forest, far from the fortress's rigidity, Ealasaid felt alive. Free. In perfect harmony with her mare, as if their hearts beat as one. She had always dreamed love would feel like this, a perfect union. But with Owen, she had never felt that connection. Perhaps because she had always kept her distance. Evander, on the other hand, came closer to her than anyone ever had. His gestures bordered on boldness, and though he had never touched her dishonorably, his nearness sent shivers through her. She sighed. Not even here, far from him, could she push him from her thoughts. What kind of spell was this? A bird's song distracted her. They had entered the forest. She remembered Marsili's warnings, especially during times of war, but she didn't turn the reins. Not yet. The forest offered her refuge. The scents of damp earth, moss and bark wrapped around her. The wind's whisper through the leaves rocked her like an ancient lullaby. These trees, as old as time, held secrets that fascinated her. Perhaps they had witnessed wars, births, stolen loves. Maybe, long ago, a warrior had found a lost child here, shivering in the cold. She let her mind wander until Owen neighed, uneasy. The mare tilted her head, trying to look at her. "It's all right, we'll rest a bit," Ealasaid said. She dismounted without tying her. She trusted Owen wouldn't stray. She had always believed animals shouldn't be tethered without reason, and she had even convinced Neil of that. She sat on a flat stone. There, among ancient trees, Ealasaid found something she hadn't found in prayer or within stone walls: comfort. For a moment, she became the girl who once ran through fields without a care for duty or decency. Out here, nature was her home. Nature always chooses wisely. Ealasaid stood abruptly. Between two tree trunks, a figure in a red cloak was watching her. It seemed to be a woman, short in stature and with an aged voice. "Who are you?" Ealasaid asked, not daring to move. She glanced at Eloan, but the mare was grazing calmly as if nothing were amiss. "It never makes mistakes," the woman went on, ignoring the question. "Nature has given you a gift. The gift of restoring balance and harmony. Will you be worthy of something so powerful?" Ealasaid looked at her with compassion. Perhaps she was a poor madwoman, lost in the woods. "Are you hungry?" she offered gently. She walked to the saddlebags, and pulled out a piece of rye bread and 2 slices of cheese. Though she planned to return before lunch to avoid worrying Marsaili, she had taken the provisions just in case. The woman hadn't moved. Ealasaid took a few steps toward her with a kind smile, her arm extended in offering. The word almost slipped from his lips, but Evander managed to hold it back. The girl was innocent. If he frightened her, he would regret it. She had yet to know a man's bed, and didn't seem aware of the power she held over his body.
"Let's return to the fortress," he said hoarsely.
"I've neglected my duties because of you," he added, more angry with himself than with his betrothed. What the hell was it about this woman that made him lose his mind? Ealasaid was about to reply that she hadn't asked anything of him, when she suddenly remembered the woman who had been with her before Evander arrived. She turned her head toward where she'd left her, but there was no sign of her. Only the linen handkerchief remained, abandoned on the grass. She took a few steps and picked it up. The cheese and bread were still inside. She hadn't taken them. "You scared her off," Ealasaid murmured, more to herself than to him. Evander frowned, confused. "Who?"
"The woman I was speaking with before you came."
"She didn't seem to have a home." Evander's eyes gleamed with an odd expression Ealasaid couldn't quite place. She even thought she saw a fleeting smile curve his lips, but it vanished almost instantly, replaced by a tense grimace. "You were inviting a homeless stranger into my clan? And it was a woman? Did you think I was inviting a man?" she shot back, scandalized.
"That would be improper."
"I thought you were talking to a rabbit, a squirrel, or God knows what other wild creature."
"It was a woman.
And because of you, she didn't take the food I offered. I'm worried." She seemed not right in the head. Evander let out an exasperated huff. "Do you realize the danger you put yourself in? A deranged homeless woman could have robbed you, or worse."
"Nonsense," said Ealasaid dismissively, walking to Eloan to tuck the handkerchief into the saddlebags.
"She wasn't some ragged, aggressive man. Just a poor old woman." Evander clenched his jaw, holding back a curse. The girl was far too trusting for her own good. "Come with me," he ordered curtly. Chapter 18. Those who dream with the soul, awaken with a different skin. There are souls that walk between two worlds. Not as strangers, but as weavers of a bridge others cannot see. Ealasaid didn't always understand what she felt. But from childhood, she knew there were voices in the earth that no one else could hear. Ancient voices like wind beneath the stones that spoke to her in dreams, or in the flutter of a blackbird's wings at dusk. She was never afraid. Perhaps because her soul had known that language before she was born. She didn't seek the darkness, but she recognized it. She knew that darkness wasn't the same as evil, but depth. That's where the roots lived, the nameless creatures moving beneath the surface like sleeping memories. And though not all brought comfort, all of them brought truth. The animals listened to her. So did the trees. And when she closed her eyes, sometimes the world folded like a veil, and she could feel the whisper of what can't be seen, presences of the forest, spirits of the water, shadows that weren't threats but thresholds. But the true power didn't lie in seeing or knowing. It was in feeling. Feeling the wound without denying it, feeling the fear without giving in, feeling the beauty even in loss. Because only those who allow themselves to fall can rise again holding something real in their hands. Ealasaid still doesn't know the source of her gift, nor the weight of her lineage.
But something within her knows there's a deeper journey awaiting.
One that isn't taken with reason but with dreams. And there isn't always a temple to receive those who pass through such shadows. Sometimes only the forest. Only the silence. Only a wounded laird waiting for her in the rain. Eloan followed Seren's steps while Ealasaid, riding her mare, wondered where Evander was leading her. The laird had entered the forest, slowly distancing himself from the fortress. He said nothing, and though Ealasaid wasn't afraid, she felt a rising tension she couldn't tell was his or her own. When Evander dismounted, he walked toward her intending to help her down from the horse. But Ealasaid, impatient, dismounted on her own, a swift movement that broke the calm rhythm of the moment. As she turned, she noticed the laird watching her. He didn't speak, but something in his expression made her blush. "I beg your pardon for my lack of manners, my lord." "Why are you apologizing?" "I should have waited for you to help me," she replied, lowering her gaze as if doing so could deflect the weight of the moment. "And why should you, when it's clear you're perfectly capable of managing on your own?" Ealasaid bit her lip, unsure of what to say. When she realized he was still watching her, she lowered her hand from her face as if the gesture had revealed too much. She wasn't sure what Evander had seen in her, but she feared it was more than she meant to show. "It's what's expected of a lady," she murmured, repeating a lesson she'd heard so often it no longer felt like her own. "To make a man believe you're incapable." There was no reproach in his voice, only a plain, unembellished truth. Yet the words stirred something inside her. It was true. She knew it. She had always known it.
But she had learned to accept without questioning.
To please. Not to cause discomfort. Owen used to say that a lady should never show strength if she wanted to be respected. That virtue lay in restraint. Her mother would nod in silent agreement. Ealasaid had tried to believe them.
"It's not deceit, my lord."
A lady must appear graceful, allow the gentleman to assist her. It's part of our feminine way. Evander looked at her for a moment with narrowed eyes. "You dismounted with agility and confidence. Those are qualities I value more than grace. In a moment of danger, they could save your life." Ealasaid nodded silently. She didn't know how to respond to that kind of praise. She agreed, though a part of her felt as if admitting it betrayed something sacred. "You're very different from the men I've known," she said finally. He raised an eyebrow, waiting. "You don't expect me to act like a lady." "You're used to men who can't stand a woman being capable," he replied calmly. "I'm not one of them. My pride doesn't suffer from recognizing your skill." Ealasaid could barely hide the emotion those words stirred in her. It wasn't vanity, nor satisfaction. It was something deeper. Something that for a moment made her feel seen. "Thank you, my lord. Why have we stopped here?" "Follow me." There were no further explanations, and she didn't ask for any. She followed him through the trees to a clearing where sunlight filtered through the leaves, and a small pond lay still. The water was so clear, the sky seemed to rest inside it without breaking the surface. Evander pointed toward the edge. She stepped closer, holding her breath at the stillness of the scene. Dark fish moved slowly and one smaller with bright scales swam toward them. She followed it with her eyes, fascinated by how it slipped between the others without apparent fear. "It's beautiful," she whispered, afraid any loud sound might shatter that peace. Then it happened, the smaller fish struck. It was an instant. A flash. One of the larger fish sank motionless to the bottom, while the rest scattered. Ealasaid couldn't hold back a gasp.
"What's most beautiful and fragile to the eye is often the most dangerous," said Evander, and when she turned, he was watching her.
She held his gaze, sensing his words meant more than just the pond. "Did you bring me here to teach me that lesson?" "I thought I did," he replied with a barely there smirk.
But now I think I was the one who needed the reminder.
You're dangerous, milady.
Me?
Evander raised a hand, and brushed aside a strand of hair that had fallen across her temple. He did it gently, almost tenderly. Then his palm grazed Ealasaid's cheek, and something inside her tightened. Not out of fear but from something more complex, as if that touch had awakened something that had always been asleep.
The most dangerous of all, he murmured.
You tempt me with your beauty. She could barely respond.
That's not my intention.
Which is why you're even more so. She didn't fully understand the meaning of his words, but she didn't need to. There was a clarity in them that didn't come from thought, but from something older. When Evander closed the distance and placed his hand at the back of her neck, she didn't move. It wasn't reason that held her still. It was the certainty that what was about to happen carried its own inevitable weight. The kiss was restrained at first, but something fierce pulsed within it. Evander wasn't seeking tenderness, and Ealasaid wasn't expecting it. The gesture had the intensity of something long suppressed. Her body reacted before her mind.
Her arms found his neck.
Her mouth learned the shape of his. She wasn't thinking. She was only feeling. Evander's hand slid down her back, and boldly settled on her rear. Ealasaid tensed for a moment. The thought of pulling away flickered through her mind, brief as a blink, but she didn't follow it. Not then. She didn't want the kiss to end. And yet she knew it would. Every pleasure has an end. A cough made them pull apart. They turned at the same time. A man was watching them, standing beside his horse. He was about to speak, but Evander was faster. You'd better have a good excuse, he snapped, his voice lethal. The intruder turned pale. Ealasaid, her face flushed with a mix of desire and shame, barely caught something about the twins' return and other lairds. She tried to focus, though she still felt the echo of that kiss on her skin.
When are they expected to arrive? Asked Evander.
In a few days, laird. The messengers spoke with the commander.
Why didn't Struan come to tell me himself?
His wife has gone into labor. That sentence brought Ealasaid back to reality. I promised I'd be with her, she said immediately.
That won't be necessary, milady, the warrior interjected, addressing only her.
The midwife, 3 maids and her husband are with her. You'd only be in the way. Out of the corner of her eye, Ealasaid saw Evander clench his fists. He was about to explode. But he held back. Then she remembered what he'd told her when she dismounted on her own. She took a deep breath, and looking at the warrior replied, I appreciate your concern, but it's not your place to tell me what to do. I will go to her chamber, and offer my help. If I truly get in the way, I'll leave. Not before. The man blinked, suddenly aware of his mistake. Milady, Bran, Evander interrupted, his voice like steel. If you're not going to apologize for your insolence, I suggest you keep your mouth shut. Or I'll shut it for you. My apologies, milady. I meant no offense. Ealasaid gave a small nod, accepting the apology. The warrior mounted, and rode off at a gallop toward the fortress. When she turned back to Evander, he was looking at her with open, genuine pride. Pride for her. Ealasaid felt a warm, intense joy. She took a few steps toward him, longing to feel his lips again, but something dark flickered across the laird's face. And when he spoke, his voice was firm. We must return, milady. I have a summit to prepare for, and you have a friend who needs your company. Ealasaid nodded. He was right. Isbael was waiting for her. But as she walked back, all she could think about was that wild kiss, so full of hunger that had made her forget everything, even Owen. Hours later, when Isbael gave birth to a beautiful baby girl, Ealasaid discovered something even more unsettling. She didn't feel guilty. She didn't feel she'd done anything wrong. As if kissing Evander had been what she was always meant to do. And just as she had sensed, that kiss had changed everything. Chapter 19. Dreams do not lie, but they speak in ancient tongues. You only have 6 days, and I live in constant fear that something bad will happen, said Isabel, cradling her daughter tenderly. Ealasaid reached out to stroke the few reddish strands on the baby's head.
She's beautiful.
She has your sweetness, and her father's hair, she replied with a smile, watching the child's face, now surrendered to sleep after a brief fit of crying. Hair isn't the only thing she inherited from him, Isabel muttered with a grimace as she sat down.
She's got his bad temper too.
Ealasaid laughed, amused. Babies cry, it's normal, she said with a soothing tone that masked her inexperience.
But this little one is lovely.
She is, Isabel agreed, gazing at her daughter with pride. And the birth, it was less awful than I imagined. I barely felt any pain. Ealasaid leaned against the wall, holding back laughter as she recalled the screams Isabel had unleashed during labor. And the curses hurled at Struan, who had borne the brunt of her fury. Isabel caught her expression and sighed. Fine, she admitted, even though Ealasaid hadn't said a word.
It hurt like bloody hell.
If I'd been able to stand, I would have torn off what makes Struan a man, just to make sure he never got me pregnant again. Ealasaid burst out laughing.
But now that I have Grania in my arms,
I'd do it again. 1,000 times if I had to. She'd named her daughter after her late sister, a decision she shared with Struan the moment the child was born. Ealasaid had witnessed it. The warrior, unshakable in battle, touched his eyes, trying to hold back tears. What moved Ealasaid even more was learning that Struan hadn't just been present at the birth, he had stayed by his wife's side for 6 straight hours, holding her hand. An unusual gesture for a man of their clan, and yet, it was what she now wanted for herself when her time came. For a moment, she pictured the father of her future child, holding her hand. It wasn't Owen's face that came to mind, but Evander's. Evander, she murmured aloud, without realizing it. She pulled herself together quickly.
Has he met Grania yet?
Isabel, sharp as ever, raised an eyebrow and looked at her intently before answering. Struan introduced them yesterday. A short pause followed. Do you have a date set for the wedding? Ealasaid had hoped she'd diverted her attention, but Isabel wasn't so easily fooled. My daughter needs a partner in mischief. Someone to trust with all her secrets, she added with a gentle smile. I know you didn't want to marry Evander, but has something changed? Am I wrong? Ealasaid coughed, uneasy. She glanced at the closed door of the chamber. For a second, she thought about escaping to avoid a conversation that was already making her uncomfortable, but she didn't. If Isabel had noticed, it was because it was obvious. She hadn't spoken to Evander again since the kiss. The first days had been spent helping Isabel, and lately the fortress had filled with guests for the upcoming summit.
There's something I haven't told you, she began, nervously rubbing her hands.
I didn't want to marry Evander, because I was already in love. Aren't you anymore? The question caught her off guard. She'd just spoken in the past tense without realizing it. She had dreamed of Evander's lips, his touch, those dark eyes that disarmed her. Could it be her feelings for Owen had faded? Or were they never that strong to begin with?
I haven't seen him in over 2 years.
I thought a selfless, pure love could survive the distance.
But maybe I was wrong.
You weren't, Isabel replied, gently laying the baby in the cradle. The child whimpered softly, then fell back asleep. But if you're doubting now, maybe that love wasn't as deep as you believed. Evander kissed me, Ealasaid confessed. Owen did too, once the day he left. But his kiss didn't make you feel the same as Evander's, Isabel finished. Ealasaid nodded. Isabel took her hands. I care for Evander, she said honestly, but I'm not sure he's capable of love. I don't even know if he has a heart to do it. Everyone has the capacity to love, Ealasaid replied firmly. And he does have a heart. A big one. He doesn't show it often, but I've seen it. He may seem harsh, but he's been generous and considerate with me. Isabel sighed. We don't choose who we love. But Evander isn't a man you should fall in love with. I haven't, Ealasaid denied, though her voice lacked conviction. She let go of Isabel's hands and walked to the cradle, gently caressing the baby's cheek. I can't. I'm afraid it's already too late to stop it, whispered Isabel. Ealasaid felt she should say something, but no words came. Everything was too confusing. Isabel. The chamber door opened, and Leah appeared, interrupting the conversation. She froze when she saw Ealasaid.
Is something wrong, Leah? Asked Isabel, concerned.
The young woman didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on Ealasaid, burning with fury.
This is all your fault, she finally said.
Ealasaid looked at her, bewildered. They had barely exchanged words since her arrival. She couldn't understand what she could have done to deserve such fury. Startled by the harsh tone and the bang of the door, Grania let out a sob. Isabel picked her up to soothe her. She was about to scold Leah, but Ealasaid gestured for her not to.
What do you mean? Marsaili has a problem.
Ealasaid frowned. It didn't completely surprise her. In recent days she had noticed her maid withdrawn, distant. When she asked, Marsaili insisted she was fine, but Ealasaid knew she was lying. Still, she had never liked forcing anyone to share what they weren't ready to reveal.
What's wrong with her?
Because of you, Leah repeated, stressing each word. The laird has withheld her wages for the next 4 weeks. She needs that money to help her family. Because of me. You went into the forest without permission. He'd ordered her to keep watch and inform him of any movement. Ealasaid felt the guilt like a stone in her chest. She had lied to Marsaili to get out into the forest, and Marsaili had trusted her. But guilt gave way to anger. She heard Isabel say something but didn't register the words. She walked out of the chamber with purpose, descended the stairs, and crossed the fortress without stopping. The great hall was empty. Only Branwen, lying near the hearth, lifted her head to watch her. Since the birth of Isabel and Struan's daughter, the dog and now her pups usually slept beside her, but that morning they were gone. It didn't surprise her. The mother had hidden her young in the pantry when the outsiders arrived. Ealasaid admired that protective instinct. They were a family. Like hers. Like the one she had wanted to build with Owen, a family she had almost sacrificed for a kiss.
But what a kiss!
One that had awakened her from a slumber she hadn't even known she was in. She shook her head. She needed to see Evander. She felt everything had been a misunderstanding, and wanted to clear it up. She knelt and stroked the dog's fur. Do you know where Evander is? Branwen tilted her head, then stood and walked toward a wooden door reinforced with iron. Is he behind that door? Before the dog could respond in her silent language, the door opened and a warrior stepped out. Ealasaid took the chance to slip inside, with Branwen at her heels. Just as she suspected, Evander was there. He wasn't alone. One of the twins was with him. At first she thought it was Orle, but the young man's sarcastic smile revealed it was Ruagri. How can I help you, lass? Asked Evander with a smile, resting a hand on the maps spread across the table. With your manners, scoffed Ruagri.
You forgot to knock.
He was clearly still bitter about the kick Ealasaid had given him. A man like him wouldn't easily forget a blow to his pride. Your opinion doesn't interest me, she replied coldly. If you'll excuse me, I wish to speak to your brother alone. An Englishwoman doesn't? She was English, Evander interrupted firmly.
Now she's a Rutherford.
My betrothed. Your future sister-in-law. Treat her as such. You want me to obey a woman? Ruagri said, incredulous. I order you to obey her, Evander said flatly. Ealasaid didn't know who was more stunned, Ruagri or herself. The twin looked ready to argue, but something in Evander's gaze made him think better of it. He left, slamming the door behind him. Ealasaid felt a sudden warmth in her chest. Evander hadn't defended her like a helpless damsel. He had acknowledged her for what she was, his equal. Milady, he said, turning to her. How can I be of service? She bit her lip, trying to contain the storm that was about to break. Chapter 20. Whoever truly loves sets free even while staying. Evander Rutherford was known as a ruthless, fierce laird. Some even went as far as to call him a barbarian, a butcher. But no one knew him for his hospitality. And rightly so. Evander detested visitors. He didn't like strangers roaming his lands or prying into the affairs of his clan. A peculiarity shared by most of his kin. Yet even a man like him had to yield now and then. The summit he had convened with other lairds had brought an unusual commotion of outsiders to his land. To avoid disruptions and maintain discretion, he had chosen one of the rooms in the North Tower as the meeting place, far from the servants and residents of the fortress. What would be discussed there was of great importance. He couldn't afford interruptions. But even duty couldn't hold his focus. His mind kept drifting back to that morning, when Ealasaid had rejected him. Although in truth, she had melted in his arms before reminding him that he hadn't gotten his way. And biting his lip. Ealasaid, his betrothed, had proven to be far more defiant than she let on. She didn't stay quiet in the face of injustice. She fought tooth and nail for what she believed was right. A far more interesting woman than he had expected. And that was starting to become a problem. Are we waiting for a divine sign to begin? Murdoch of Dunbray muttered, leaning lazily against the wall, arms crossed over his chest. Besides Evander, he was the only one who hadn't taken a seat on the crimson upholstered chairs around the solid oak table. The servants had polished it to a gleam. Evander stepped forward across the Persian rug his father had once purchased from a merchant. It was the first time he had used that room since the old man's death. His father had delighted in showing off the luxuries he surrounded himself with, spending coins that could have fed the entire clan. To Evander, those indulgences were nothing but pure vanity. What else could be expected from a man like him? That bastard had never cared for anyone but himself. Evander had considered selling it all, maybe even burning it. But he hadn't yet found the time. He approached the table and placed his hands on the wood.
"It won't be God who saves us but the edge of our swords," he said dryly. "The MacTavish won't stop.
They aim to wipe out our clans one by one." "Bran MacTavish is a dangerous bastard," Malachi MacDougall agreed, lips drawn tight. "Though I never thought I'd live to see the day Evander Rutherford asked for help." Evander straightened, his gaze locked on the MacDougall laird, a dangerous smile on his lips. Just then Struan entered and cleared his throat. Evander glanced toward his chief commander, recognizing the signal. Struan knew him well enough to sense he was one breath away from striking Malachi. "Apologies for the delay. I had matters to attend to." "I'm not here to ask for help," Evander corrected coldly. "I speak of collaboration." Malachi smirked, and Evander's knuckles tightened on the table. "Don't lie, Rutherford," Callum Sinclair cut in. "You're not worried about the MacTavish. What drives you is your vendetta against Donal MacAlpin." Evander shrugged, not bothering to deny it. "And do the two things not go hand in hand?" he replied with sarcasm. But he didn't get to answer further. He still didn't understand why Callum had come instead of his father, Laird Lachlan Sinclair. Though on second thought it was obvious, the old man would rather send his son than endure Evander's presence for even a few minutes. If not for the need to cross Sinclair lands, Evander would have sent the stubborn bastard straight to hell. "The only thing I needed from your father was passage through his lands," Evander went on, a crooked smile forming, "and I secured that thanks to your poor skills with a sword." He was referring to the duel Callum had fought months earlier against Ruagri, a match Evander himself had arranged. If Ruagri lost, the Sinclairs would reclaim the village of Glenvale, taken years ago by Evander's grandfather in another blood duel. But Ruagri won, and the Rutherfords gained something even more valuable: safe passage through Sinclair territory, a route that cut several days from their journey and avoided unnecessary conflict. Even so, Evander hated relying on anyone else's watch. He dreamed of being the sole master of those cursed lands. Roxburghshire wasn't just about power, it meant freedom, resources, territorial control, and clear paths to the north. But to seal that ambition, he needed something both simpler and more complicated. He needed Ealasaid to accept the marriage. And still she kept refusing him. His rational side desired her urgently, like a man charting lines across a map. But there was another voice within him, darker and more primal, that longed to prolong the resistance. To stretch out the thrill of the hunt. He knew she wanted him. He'd seen it in her eyes, in the silences thick with something deeper than words. But that untamed pride, that fierce stubbornness that defined her held her firm. He didn't believe it was the fault of the rigid upbringing reserved for ladies of her bloodline. No. Ealasaid was a free spirit, like the animals she cared for and understood better than she did people.
But she was hiding something.
Shofra had taught him to notice what others overlooked, and he had learned to listen more to silence than to confessions. With any other woman, he would have taken what he wanted and moved on. But Ealasaid he wanted to strip completely, not just of clothes but of shadows, of secrets, of every hidden corner of her soul. And her skin too. The skin he imagined night after night, convinced he could take her to heaven, and let himself be dragged with her into hell. "Am I boring you, Rutherford?" Alistair Fletcher's voice snapped him out of his thoughts. He cursed silently. That damned woman had the power to unnerve him, even from afar. He didn't answer. He hadn't even registered when the laird had started speaking. Fletcher took his silence as agreement, and continued with his speech. As always conciliatory, trying to avoid conflict. But Evander knew war was inevitable. And he knew Alistair. Beneath his mask of peace, beat the relentless heart of a warrior best not underestimated. The meeting dragged on for hours, until they finally agreed to adjourn for the day. "Seems like everything's going smoothly," Struan remarked once they were alone. "Everything will be fine once they get off my land," Evander growled, dropping into the chair Alistair had vacated moments earlier. "I don't like seeing them roaming around as they please."
"It's just a formality."
Struan shared the sentiment, though he knew they still needed the other lairds for now. "Everyone understands the McTavish must be stopped before it's too late. Bran's clever. He won't attack if he sees us united. And Donal MacAlpin will be left isolated." Evander nodded. That was the plan. Make them think they had a choice when, in truth, they didn't. The Rutherford clan was the only real chance to prevent disaster. They all knew it.
"Let's hope they're not too stubborn."
"I don't want this summit dragging on for weeks." "Is that why you're feeding them only fruits and vegetables? A strategy to scare them off faster?" Evander snorted, guessing where Struan was headed.
"The cook chooses the menu."
"You know I don't get involved in that." "True. But don't forget you banned the slaughter of any animal Ealasaid looks after. And she looks after nearly all of them. So we're surviving on what the men can hunt. Which, by the way, isn't much. They're too busy guarding your land to chase prey. The cook's not too pleased with you. Not every pig is hers to worry about."
"I don't give a damn," Evander snapped.
He couldn't deny it. It was true. He'd seen Ealasaid's sorrow when she found out the pigs had been killed. And he wasn't going to let her go through that again. It was madness, he knew it. They raised animals to eat. But he'd rather starve than see that pain in her eyes again. That girl was driving him insane. "If I didn't know you, I'd say she's softening you," Struan said with a wicked grin. Evander exploded. He shot up, grabbed him by the shirt, and slammed him against the wall. "I don't soften," he roared. "I'm not as weak as you." Struan raised his hands in peace. "If this is your strategy to marry her, I hope it works. Because if not, you'll be facing a mutiny. The warriors like their meat." Evander narrowed his eyes. Struan was provoking him. And succeeding. He let go abruptly and stepped back. He didn't fall for provocations. He started them. But anything that had to do with Ealasaid drove him out of his mind. Without a word he turned on his heel and stormed out of the room.
"Where are you going?"
Struan called after him. Hunting, Evander growled without looking back. If they want meat, I'll get it myself. Struan burst out laughing as the door slammed shut. His friend would never admit it, might not even realize it himself. But he was falling for that girl. Chapter 21. Those who invoke without respect end up being possessed.
Who told you?
Marsaili asked, pacing nervously.
It was Leah, wasn't it?
She answered herself before Ealasaid could speak.
I asked her not to say anything, but she…
Marsaili, calm down, said Ealasaid, stepping forward and taking her hands. Leah only wanted to help. She did the right thing. After her brief encounter with Evander, Ealasaid had gone looking for Marsaili. She found her in the laundry, kneeling beside a basin, washing one of her dresses. She shouldn't have told you, the girl insisted with a sigh. She cares about you, Ealasaid replied gently. She knew Leah could be rough, but there was no question about the sincerity of her intentions. And I owe you an apology, Marsaili. I shouldn't have lied to you. I just needed to clear my head, and didn't want to drag you into my problems. But in the end, I've done exactly that. Marsaili shook her head, and slowly let go of Ealasaid's hands. You don't need to apologize. I understand. And the way she looked at her made Ealasaid certain she meant it. There was no resentment, no blame in her eyes. I'm going to make it right, Ealasaid promised. I'll get Evander to return your coins. Marsaili's face changed instantly. No, she cried, horrified, her voice rising too loudly. She turned at once, scanning the room to make sure no one had heard. I appreciate your good intentions, Ealasaid. Truly. But I don't want you to do anything. The laird's punishment was fair. Ealasaid frowned. Fair? No, Evander didn't deal in fairness. He wanted to hurt her, and he'd done it through Marsaili. That she would not allow. I won't let you or your family suffer because of me. I just want to give you back what's yours, she said with resolve, though she had no idea how she'd manage it. Marsaili opened her mouth to protest, but stopped when footsteps approached. Her body tensed. Marsaili. Orlay's voice made her relax, and the nervous expression shifted into a shy smile. Hello. His gaze flicked to Ealasaid, then settled on both of them. I didn't know you were busy. I didn't mean to interrupt. Hello, Orlay, Ealasaid greeted him. She then felt a slight tug at her wrist. Marsaili was silently begging her to stay quiet. Orlay didn't know about Evander's punishment, and her maid clearly didn't want him to find out. Ealasaid gave her a reassuring smile before turning back to Orlay. Don't worry, I was just leaving. Marsaili tried to stop her, but Ealasaid slipped gently out of reach and said goodbye, stepping into the courtyard and heading toward the fortress. Without knowing how, she ended up wandering aimlessly through the corridors. The promise she had made to Marsaili echoed loudly in her mind. She had no idea how she would get Evander to return the coins, and based on what he'd said, he didn't seem likely to change his mind. So what could she do? Because giving up wasn't an option. Marsaili would get what was hers, even if she had to steal it from Evander himself. Ealasaid stopped dead, frozen by the thought that had just taken shape. Steal? She wasn't a thief. A few weeks ago the idea wouldn't even have crossed her mind. But now it seemed like the only way. Without realizing it, she had reached the laird's chambers. The corridor was deserted. The summit was taking place in the North Tower, and the servants were busy with dinner preparations. Still, she looked both ways to make sure no one saw her, then opened the door with trembling hands. Her heart pounded. She knew what she was doing was wrong, but she also believed it was just. She would never have dared anything like this in her father's castle, even though the punishment there would have been far less severe.
But something had changed in her within the Rutherford clan.
She had been raised to believe only men could dispense justice. But now she understood that with men like Evander, she'd have to take it for herself. She closed the door carefully behind her. The creak of the wood made her hold her breath, though she knew no one could hear it from outside. And yet it wasn't fear that gripped her, it was a strange exhilaration. The thrill of doing something forbidden rushed through her like a warm current. It felt as though crossing that threshold had awakened something dormant inside her. This was an act of rebellion. A break from everything she had ever been. She began searching, scanning the room. Maybe Evander didn't keep coins there, but her father did, and she hoped he wasn't different. The air smelled like him, and Ealasaid inhaled deeply, unable to resist. It was unmistakable, strength battle man. Evander. It settled inside her and lit up her skin. And then she became aware of where she was, in his room. A place that could one day be hers, if they married. She took in the large bed draped with the clan's banners, the finely carved tables, the blankets. And suddenly, she saw herself there beneath those sheets, wearing the white nightdress her mother had ordered for her wedding night. The one she'd brought with no intention of using, until now. She shook her head to dispel the image. She couldn't be desiring Evander. He was arrogant, domineering, infuriating. And yet she did. And worse, she feared she might be falling in love with him. She swallowed hard, determined to focus. The heat was stifling, even though the fireplace was unlit. A bead of sweat slid down her cheek. She wiped it away just as her eyes landed on the chest at the foot of the bed. She leaned down and unlatched the clasps. The lid was heavy. Inside, only a few pairs of trousers, a couple of shirts, a kilt. She sighed, disappointed. But something caught her eye. Beneath one of the shirts peeked a small piece of carved wood. She picked it up carefully. It was a pendant. At its center, a spiral of interwoven symbols formed a hypnotic pattern that extended to the edges. It hung from a dark cord. She felt an urge to wear it but held back. It wasn't hers. Besides, she already wore another. The one Owen had given her. Compared to that, Evander's held no real value. But to Ealasaid, it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. She tucked it back under the shirt and closed the chest. Then she took off Owen's necklace. She no longer felt worthy of wearing it. Not after breaking her promise. She had kissed Evander. And despite everything, she wanted to do it again. She clutched the necklace in her hand, fingers curling tightly around it. For a moment, it felt as if it burned her skin. As if it were judging her. When she saw Owen again, she would be honest. She owed him that. Even though it would break his heart. She was about to leave, when she noticed a small box atop the fireplace. She picked it up, intrigued. It had a lock, but it wasn't secured. When she opened it, she found a handful of shining coins. She took only what she deemed fair to repay Marsiley, and tucked them along with Owen's necklace into the small pouch at her belt. She placed the box back in its place and slipped out silently. She hadn't gone far when she heard voices. One male, one female. She hid behind one of the heavy velvet curtains that hung from the windows. She held her breath. "I don't owe you an explanation, Leah," said the man's voice. "And I didn't ask for one, Rugri," she replied. "I just asked why you're spending another night with Skara, if you've already told me her clinginess puts you off." Ealasaid's eyes widened in confusion. What were Rugri and Leah doing there? Alone? "Because she knows how to please me in bed," he answered. His tone was bold and sure, but lacked his usual mockery. Ealasaid sensed something almost like affection in his voice. "And that's enough for you?" "Believe me, it is," he replied. "She's not the one I worry about. I'm worried about you. Don't you think you deserve someone who wants you for more than being the laird's brother? They want me for what I can do in bed. I can make a woman forget her own name." "You're a scoundrel." Ealasaid raised her eyebrows at the way Leah spoke to him. She expected an angry outburst from Rugri, but to her surprise he laughed. "I don't deny it," he said lightly. "Don't fret over me." The weight of the coins in her pouch wrapped her in guilt. She had already acted, but had there been other ways to go about it? Less drastic ones not fueled by rage. Because this wasn't about justice. It had been revenge. Blind revenge against Evander, for stirring emotions in her she didn't know how to handle. Emotions that made her question her feelings for Owen, that turned her world upside down. What kind of man was Evander Rutherford? Cruel or compassionate? A sudden snap yanked her from her thoughts. The curtains were flung open, exposing her. She hadn't noticed the voices had faded, or that Ruagri was gone. Leah stood alone in the doorway, brows furrowed. He went to his chamber, she said, as if answering a question Ealasaid hadn't asked.
He didn't see you.
Were you spying on me? The young maid was seething with anger. There wasn't a shred of deference in her tone.
But that was the least of Ealasaid's concerns.
I wasn't spying on you, she replied calmly. Then why were you hiding? Ealasaid swallowed, resisting the urge to check if the coins were still there.
I thought I saw a mouse.
I followed it to catch it and take it outside. If someone sees it inside, they'll kill it, she improvised, blurting out the first thing that came to mind. I had no reason to be here, and I wanted to avoid questions. She knew it sounded ridiculous. She loved animals, yes, but she also understood nature's ways. The castle cats hunted more for sport than hunger. And despite what Marsaili might think, there were hardly any mice left in the fortress.
But to her surprise, Leah nodded.
I haven't seen one, it probably escaped, she said, as if trying to offer hope. Ealasaid gave a shaky smile.
That's likely. Where's Marsaili?
Leah asked, surprised not to see her nearby. She needed some time to herself. Leah bit her lip, hesitant. I'm sorry for snapping at you earlier. I didn't mean to offend you. Marsaili, she was very kind to me when I arrived. Helped me without asking anything, without questioning. Her voice lowered. I'm running from something, and she reached out to me. Ealasaid looked at her with tenderness. She couldn't be more than 17. Don't worry. You did the right thing. What matters are your intentions. Marsaili won't go without her coins, I promise you that, she said, her resolve returning. She couldn't tell Leah how she'd gotten them. Not her, not Marsaili. She didn't want to make them accomplices to her actions. You're very fair, said Leah with a smile. You'll make a fine lady of the clan. Ealasaid felt perhaps it was true. As lady of the clan, she'd have the power to right Evander's wrongs. He was an admirable warrior, a leader who looked after the clan's welfare. And she could tend the keep, ensure everyone was rewarded for their work. For the first time, she imagined herself in the role her mother held in Yorkshire. And against all odds it didn't feel like a sentence. It felt like home.
But she didn't nod or thank her.
Because she still didn't know what to think of Evander. Her heart was a whirlwind. She had the urge to ask about Ruagri, about that unusual closeness with Leah.
But she held back.
It was clear the girl didn't want to talk about it.
I think I'll go rest in my chamber.
Rest? It's early. Are you feeling unwell? Should I call Marsaili? Ealasaid shook her head. She just wanted to hide the coins far from prying eyes. I'm fine, she said, trying to sound composed. You're right, it's still early. Besides, it's a good day for a walk. Would you join me? Leah glanced out the window. The sky was blanketed in dark clouds.
But she shrugged and said nothing.
I'd love to, but I have to go to the kitchen. And there's still much to do. The summit throws everything into disarray. Ealasaid suppressed a smile. It was exactly what she'd hoped to hear.
I don't want to get in your way.
If you don't mind, I'll walk you to the kitchen. The two of them descended the stairs. The fortress was unusually quiet. Most of the guests were sleeping in tents beyond the walls, and eating in the courtyards whenever the weather allowed. But outside chaos reigned. And Ealasaid preferred the calm.